On October 24, 1996, the police shot, killed 18-year-old Tyrone Lewis, an African man they had pulled over on a traffic stop. Young Tyrone was executed in broad daylight in front of over 100 witnesses just 3 blocks from the Uhuru house.
He was young, he was black, and he was shot for no reason, dog, and that's real. The man was shot for no reason, we wouldn't be doing all this today. How you think my mom looking at the news now? It could have been me, you know? It could have been me. How you think my mom? I know my mom feel every day that I'm going to get shot or something, you know?
Because of the Uhuru movement's 30-year history of organizing for black rights in St. Petersburg and throughout the country, we were able to provide political leadership and a voice for the demands of the African working class of St. Petersburg, enabling the community to respond powerfully to the police murder of Tyrone Lewis through 2 major rebellions and countless direct action mobilizations. Within 1 year of the initial rebellion, the Uhuru movement has forced both the city government and the federal government to respond to the African community's demand for economic development and social justice, and taken the struggle for black power to a new level. We in the Uhuru movement believe that this struggle in St. Petersburg is indicative of a growing resistance in African communities throughout this country. We hope that this program will be of value to organizers working to promote black power for the African community.
They murdered Tyrone Lewis. It was supposed to be just another day at Africa. That's what it was supposed to be. The state's response to the murder and to the immediate resistance that emerged was typical. But you need to know that the resistance was not typical. What happened in St. Petersburg was incredible for its advanced character. The advanced character of the resistance in St. Petersburg was striking. People all around the country, even with the garbage that was coming to the Chicago Sun-Times, and somebody who wrote that article, somebody showed it to me when I got here, somebody who wrote the article in the Chicago Sun-Times just went into a room someplace and said, why don't we say this? And then wrote something and said, why don't we say, and wrote something because it had no relationship to the real world. But the thing is that people, even through the bourgeois media, were able to see the advanced character of the struggle that happened in St. Petersburg, Florida. And it was advanced because even though there were waves of people in the streets, the thing that was so striking about St. Petersburg wasn't just burning and looting, so to speak, but there were what they like to refer to in this country when they're murdering people in Iraq and other places there were surgical strikes that saw police precincts, 2 police precincts in the African community destroyed. That saw police cars burned on the spot. Saw media vehicles burned on the spot. Saw blood-sucking, filthy, parasitic merchants, many of them been in the community for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Only role they play in the community is come there to pick up money. And as soon as they get it, they stay there long enough to exhaust the supply of money for the day. Then they take the money and leave and come back the next day to get the money. And while people may have thought the masses were sleeping and didn't understand the role of these forces, they did clearly understand their role. And they went to burn to the ground. And it happened so quickly that the ruling class were writing about how that happened and how somebody must have planned it. And somebody must have made it happen like that. And of course, what happened is that the Uhuru movement, in one form or another, has been in St. Petersburg, Florida for 30 years. An unbroken history, 30 years in that same community, an unbroken history. And it has been 30 years of political education, sometimes less effective than others, because the last thing I would want to do is paper over the contradictions in our movement, because there are contradictions which permeate our movement in St. Petersburg and throughout the country. But in St. Petersburg, there was consistent struggle to reach out to the masses. So the people rose up and made a magnificent response to the murder of Teron Lewis. The response of the state to the murder of Teron Lewis was never to reprimand the police. There was no intent ever to say the police might have done something wrong, or to say that there are any kind of underlying social contradictions which may have also contributed to the rebellion that occurred on October 24th. The response of the state, of the government, with the help of the ruling class media, was first to slander Teron Lewis, because you know he did have a criminal record. And he was speeding. And there was some crack we found in the car after he was killed. So that was the first thing they did. Secondly, the response was to isolate and criminalize the Uhuru movement for inciting the rebellion. Never, never, never did they intend to say, well, maybe the police acted improperly. Maybe there are some kind of underlying social contradictions here responsible for the rebellion. Their response was to slander that brother, to isolate and criminalize our movement, and then to indict us, to send us to prison. That was their response, immediately. But they were unsuccessful in doing that. They were unsuccessful because we pushed the democratic question successfully.
Justice! We want it now! What do we want? Justice! Where do we want it now? What do we want? Justice! Where do we want it now? No peace! No justice! No peace! No peace! No peace! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
This morning with my mind, we're here to say that we're uniting, demanding justice, and when do we want justice?
Now!
We want the release of our brothers out of those jails. We definitely want the military to move, and that's what it is. It's the military.
That's right.
We want them out of here now.
That's
We
right.
want justice.
That's right. That's right.
We found unanimously that both officers, James Knight and Sandra Mana, are guilty of murder. We found, we weren't asked to do this, but we felt it was a part of our responsibility, that both officers, James Knight and Sandra Mana, are sentenced to death in the state electric chair. Mayor David Fisher and Chief Darrell Stevens are found guilty of murder in that the city's official policy was carried out as an execution on behalf of the city. I was here in Oakland when the rebellion first took place on October 24th after the murder of Teron Lewis. I didn't get back until October 27th And when I got back on October 27th, all I could see were these news reports on television with Soul Group standing on top of a car on October 24th in the middle of this crowd of people and being identified as the Uhuru movement responsible for inciting what they characterized as the riot. And everything that was being said by the media and officials pointed clearly to the fact that they intended to indict and arrest members of the Uhuru movement. So much so that the state's attorney, who had the responsibility for looking into the shooting of Teron Lewis that sparked the rebellion, said that not that he was trying to find out if there was anything he could indict the cops who killed Lewis for, but that he was investigating the Uhuru movement. And if there was anything that he could indict us for, he was going to indict us for. This is what he said. We built a coalition coming out of that struggle in the process of making that struggle in St. Petersburg. This coalition was essentially one of the party as representative of the African working class and various sectors of the African primitive petty bourgeoisie or middle class. And it was this political work that prevented them from being able to kill us or to indict and imprison us on the spot. It was a coalition that came about because the African petty bourgeoisie, after every incident such as the rebellion, wanted to rush down town and ask the ruling class and the government for money for their little social programs. And they like to say, boss, if you give us this money, we can keep the angry masses from rising up again. But they had a problem this time, because the government had already said it was the Uhuru movement that made the people, angry masses, rise up. So how can you promise to keep the angry masses from rising up? In order to be able to make a statement to the government, they had to make an agreement with the Uhuru movement. And our agreement was, we'll back up your demand for money and resources, although we want to give shape and definition to what that should look like. But you got to unite with us that the police who murdered Teron Lewis must be prosecuted, that the family of Teron Lewis must be paid reparations for his death, that everybody who was arrested by the government during the rebellion must be freed, and that hands off the Uhuru movement. That's the demand you got to make. And so we won that with them. And as a consequence of winning that, what it meant was now for the government to come to get us, they had to come through the preachers and other sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie who they need to be on their side. And so that made it difficult for them to do. On November 13th, the police used 27 members of a special weapons police organization called the Green Team to arrest, pull over, right at our headquarters, a member of the Uhuru movement, they said, because he had an expired license plate. You know, you usually get a ticket for that, right? They used 27 members of a special weapons organization, 7 carloads, pull him over because of an expired license plate. I'm walking up at the time this is going on. They got the brother in the back seat of a car, handcuffed, searching his car and what have you. And when I walked up, the brother who was with me, they say, we want to put you in jail too. We got a warrant for your arrest. And by now, hundreds of African people are out on the streets because of the police activity. And November 13th was really important because that was the day that the grand jury that was supposedly investigating the shooting of Teron Lewis and whether the police had committed any crime when they did that, came back, as everybody expected, and exonerated the police. Said police didn't do nothing wrong in killing this brother on that day. So people were already upset about that. So now the police move on our building. Hundreds of people are now out on the streets watching this affair. This is when they rushed to get the brother, to arrest him, they pushed us back against the wall, pepper sprayed me in the face, pepper sprayed Sister Kinara Zima in the face, and arrested the brother. Hundreds of Africans died out on the streets, standing in front of the Uhuru House on both sides of the streets, just watching. The police carrying on, riding up and down in front of the Uhuru House, 5 in a car, guns sticking out of the doors which are partially open and what have you, and the people just standing there watching them, right up and down, up and down. In the meantime, we had already been putting out leaflets announcing that at our regular 6:30 meeting, we were going to be talking about the verdict that came from the grand jury. At 6 o'clock, the police put up barricades on the streets on both sides of the Uhuru House, turned people around, told them they couldn't come to the meeting. Said, you come to the meeting, we're going to put you in jail or do something worse to you. That was at 6 o'clock. Hundreds of people out on the streets. The police now have begun using pepper spray to try to make people leave the area. Some of the people are running into the auditorium, getting away from the police using pepper spray. About 100 or so people were in the auditorium. Then I'm trying to calm the people down on the inside because of the police antics going on where hundreds of people are still outside. And the police, and the brother comes up to me and says, the police have said that over the bullhorn that this is an unlawful assembly and that we've got 5 minutes to get out of the building or they're going to shoot tear gas into the auditorium. They began spraying people at the door of the auditorium with pepper spray, so that they couldn't close the doors. 30 seconds later, after the announcement, they started shooting tear gas into the auditorium. What you got to understand is there were something like 300 policemen outside the building. They didn't just have the St. Petersburg Police Department, they had the Florida Highway Patrol, the Pinellas County Sheriff Department, and police from neighboring cities. 300 or more cops were outside our building. They used all the tear gas that they had in the city of St. Petersburg. They didn't have no more tear gas when they finished shooting tear gas on our building. They used helicopters, and they had a small plane, at least one small plane that they used against us. Tear gas coming into the building. There were babies in that building. There were children and women and men in the building, and people are screaming, the women trying to get to their children and take care of them, and trying to get out of the rear of the building. And when they would open the door to the rear, they run into a wall of tear gas because the cops have shot tear gas not only in the auditorium, but everywhere around the building. The people, they were shooting tear gas into a tree behind our building, and it set it afire, the canister set it afire, and threatened the vehicle, a van behind the building, and through that threatened the building itself. And the people in the community would run out and put the fire out, and the police would start the fire again. 3 times that happened. And the people would try to put the fire out. They actually tore a huge branch out of the tree and were dragging it across the street, and the police would shoot tear gas at them to chase them away so that our building, our vehicles and our building could burn down. They were bad that night. 300 of them out there. And then the people rose up and met them with a fierce armed resistance. You understand? You know what I'm saying? Met them with a fierce armed resistance. It was a serious resistance, you understand? Because they intended, first, they failed in their attempt to isolate us politically, criminalize us, and shoot us off the prison. They failed. Then they tried to create a situation where they could provoke something that would allow them to attack us militarily. They were going to win it, get rid of us by a military attack. And when they attacked us militarily, they got their asses kicked by the people right there in the streets. I mean this. I mean this. You have to understand what happened. It was serious. The people brought down a police helicopter with gunfire, brought it down, forced it down with gunshot. They wounded one cop, shot one cop. And the transcript of a police communication over the radio that appeared in the paper the next day had the commander screaming over the radio, "Pull the troops back. We're under heavy fire." You understand? We're under heavy fire. Under heavy fire. $300 armed to the teeth. Used every bit of tear gas against us that they had in the city. Pull the troops back. We're under heavy fire. And we're talking about the youngsters, they were called the ghost faces. Ghost faces. Because they tied their shirts around their faces and bandanas around their faces and jumped dead in their chests. So, the police never even were able to enter the building. If the crime was being committed, the building wasn't in it. Nobody in the building was arrested. It wasn't about arresting anybody. It was about destruction. They meant to kill, maim on that day. They wanted a military victory, and they got their asses kicked. Serious guerrilla warfare. Serious guerrilla warfare. I mean, as serious as any confrontation that's happened any place in the world. So they lost. The police lost. And because they failed, because they just knew all they had to do was crush the Uhuru movement, then it would be over. It would be just business as usual, but they failed. They were defeated politically, and then they were defeated militarily, and then after that, but it was serious. Because people in the Uhuru movement, we found ourselves sleeping in safe houses. We couldn't stay any place where they knew where we were, because they'd come 4 o'clock in the morning. They'll come 4 o'clock in the morning, they'll kill you dead. You understand? But they made a mistake. They came at 6:30, and the people were awake, and the people were ready for them, and the people kicked their asses. You understand?
On October 24th, there was a murder committed. Tyron Lewis was murdered by 2 officers, Knight and Minor, and the attacks that came after that have continued up until even today. The first attack we saw happen as Bernie McCabe blamed the Uhuru movement for the Jess Rebellion that happened after the murder. We, the African community, did not want to step over another dead body or have business as usual. So there was a response to this murder. And people acted in a way in which got the attention, worldwide attention. And we, as the Uhuru movement, we represent the poor and African working class, as we have for 30 years, since the Black Revolution of the 60s was defeated with the Black Panther Party, etc. Many of our leaders were assassinated, and many still are in prison today. The Uhuru movement stands and represents the African working class here in this city and all across the country and even across the world. The Uhuru movement held, as we do every week, meetings to allow the African community to voice their opinions on some of the things that had happened. We had a march to the funeral. We also had a trial for the African community to state if the police officers were guilty of murder, and we did come out with a verdict that they were guilty of murder, and that the city of St. Petersburg was also guilty of the policy of shoot to kill, and that the so-called keep the niggers in check way that the police act in our community is totally in violation of our constitutional rights. On November 13th, the verdict came out, and a member of the Uhuru movement was arrested. 27 members of the Green Team came to the building and purposely tried to invoke provocation, and another member of the Uhuru movement was arrested. I myself and the chairman and founder of the Uhuru movement was sprayed with pepper spray, and 100 or so people came out of their homes. We have meetings every Wednesday evening, and that happened to be a Wednesday, where we were going to have a forum. That night, as people were coming to the meeting, police started barricading the streets, blocking all intersections to the building, denying people access to the building, saying that they would be arrested if they came to our meeting. They also pepper sprayed people and shot tear gas. All of the tear gas they had in the city of St. Petersburg went toward our building. People who were in the room were children, men and women who were terrified. As the meeting started, the police officers who were in force with M16s, riot gear, started on the outside shooting tear gas. They had on the loudspeaker, we declare this an unlawful assembly, and if you don't get out of the building in 5 minutes, we will gas the building. Within 30 seconds, they started gassing the building. There was total chaos in the building. Some of the people who were in our meeting are in this room. Total chaos, stampede. A sister who I know right here was trampled. People with their children throwing up, sick, etc. They intended to kill us that night. And if it wasn't for the courageous brothers and sisters who stood up after the murder of Tyron Lewis, I wouldn't be here today, and many people in this room would not be here, because they intended to kill us on that night of November 13th. All of the tear gas I mentioned, which they said in all the newspapers and radios, was used on our building that night. Our constitutional rights were violated, our freedom of speech, our freedom of assembly, and the mayor and chief of police stated earlier that day that they did not want members of the Uhuru movement on the streets, precisely because the verdict was coming out, and that they didn't want us to say something that they didn't like. Police tried to burn down our buildings by shooting tear gas into a tree. When members of the community would put out the fire, they were shot at with the tear gas, and the tree was set on fire 3 times. The tree was next to our van, and the van next to our building. There was later an incident where someone came and said that our building would be, there would be a sweep at our building at 6 o'clock. So from that night, October 24th, until even today, the whole black community has been under martial law. Said that they stand with the Uhuru movement, know that the Uhuru movement has been under attack, and we demand that this attack stop. We are standing up on behalf